All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at one of the most enigmatic figures in human history, King Solomon. This is a guy whose legacy sits at an absolutely wild intersection. I mean, on one hand, he's this ultimate pillar of divine scripture and historical wealth, but on the other, he is the central character in some of the most esoteric occult legends ever written. It is a crazy duality, and it's fascinated scholars and mystics for literally millennia.
Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to explore this massive paradox. How is it that ancient sources paint the exact same man simultaneously as this golden age biblical ruler overflowing with divine wisdom and as a master of demonic forces who bound spirits to his will? It's a puzzle that completely flips how we view ancient power.
You know, there's a famous legend that really hits the nail on the head when it comes to Solomon's complex mind. The story goes that he asked a jeweler for a very specific magic ring. He wanted one that would make him sad when he was happy and happy when he was sad. The jeweler brings him a ring inscribed with just 4 words, "This too shall pass." It's incredibly profound, but it also perfectly foreshadows the tragic, inevitable arc of his very own life.
So to truly understand this paradox, we're going to deconstruct his legacy step by step today. We'll be looking at his rise to power, his wisdom and wealth, the legends of the Sorcerer King, his fall into folly, and finally, his deeply complicated legacy. Let's get into it. Starting off with Part 1, the rise to power.
See, Solomon wasn't exactly the shoo-in for the throne. His story doesn't begin with some peaceful coronation. It starts with a massive scandal. He was born out of the messy aftermath of King David's affair with Bathsheba. Then, when David was dying, Solomon's older half-brother, Adonijah, tried to pull a coup and take the crown. It didn't work, and Solomon got the nod. But he didn't secure his kingdom by playing nice. He locked it down through ruthless, calculated executions of his rivals, including Adonijah and his dad's old general Joab. So yeah, the golden era, it basically began with blood. But right in the middle of all that cutthroat politics, we see a totally different side of the young king, which brilliantly shows his initial pure intent. The ancient sources say that at Gibeon, God appeared to Solomon in a dream and offered him literally anything he desired. And he didn't ask for the death of his enemies, he didn't ask for mountains of gold, he just asked for a discerning heart. He just wanted the wisdom to govern his people fairly.
Which brings us to Part 2, wisdom, wealth, and wonder.
Because he didn't ask for riches, the texts state that God gave him unmatched wealth right alongside that intellect, kicking off Israel's golden age. Just check out this number. 3,000. That is the sheer volume of Proverbs he's credited with writing, on top of over 1,000 songs. Solomon became the absolute master of science, nature, and diplomacy. People were traveling from all over the known world just to pick his brain on everything from botany to human psychology.
And then we have this staggering number, 666. In this context, it represents the talents of gold he reportedly received annually. To put that into perspective for a second, that is over 4 tons of pure gold every single year. Through brilliant diplomacy, rather than war, Solomon turned his kingdom into a global trading hub. We're talking fleets of ships reaching as far as Africa and India, hauling back ivory, silver, and exotic spices.
And you've probably heard the famous story that really cemented this legend. 2 women come to him, both claiming to be the mother of the same baby. Solomon's solution? He orders the baby to be cut in half with a sword. Now, it sounds horrific, but it was a psychological masterclass. It instantly revealed the true mother, who begged to give the baby away just to save its life. That kind of sharp, terrifying brilliance proved to the ancient world that he possessed a sort of divine justice. His reputation got so huge that even the formidable Queen of Sheba traveled 1,500 miles just to test him with complex riddles, and she was absolutely blown away, eventually gifting him tons of gold. But what's really fascinating is the ripple effect of this meeting. According to Ethiopian tradition, they actually had a son together named Menelik, and the legend goes that Menelik eventually smuggled the lost Ark of the Covenant down to Aksum, Ethiopia, where some believe it is still guarded today.
All right, let's pivot to Part 3, the Sorcerer King.
Because when you look past the traditional biblical texts, esoteric and Islamic traditions paint a vastly different, way more supernatural picture. Central to all of this is the fabled Seal of Solomon. According to the Talmud and mystical texts like the Testament of Solomon, his power wasn't just diplomatic, it was deeply occult. He supposedly had this magical ring handed down by the Archangel Michael that gave him absolute dominion over demons, spirits, and planetary energies. By the 1700s, you had occultists passing around grimoires like the Lesser Key of Solomon. These texts claim he was out there actively binding terrifying entities to do his dirty work. We're talking Asmodeus, the demon of chaos, Beelzebub, a lord of the underworld, and Orneus. And over in Islamic tradition, it's said he commanded jinns, binding them to perform massive feats of heavy labor.
And nowhere is this clash between history and myth more obvious than with his magnum opus, the First Temple in Jerusalem. Now, biblical history tells us it was this architectural marvel built over 7 years by 180,000 human laborers. But the occult legends? They insist it couldn't have been built by men alone. They claim it was actually raised by chained demons and jinns, completely bound by Solomon's magic sigils.
There's actually an amazing story in Islamic lore about how he died that illustrates this perfectly. The legend goes that Solomon died while leaning on his wooden staff, but the bound jinns were so terrified of his power that they just kept building his monuments. They were completely fooled for days or maybe even years, thinking he was still watching them. They only realized they were free when a tiny worm finally chewed through the staff. The king's body collapsed, and the illusion was broken.
So how does the wisest man on earth become its greatest fool? That brings us to part 4, the fall into folly.
It all basically came down to a fatal mix of politics and matters of the heart. To lock down that international peace and build out his trade network, he married an absolutely staggering 1,000 women, 700 royal wives, and 300 concubines. It's wild. He was operating like a modern celebrity who literally has everything handed to him and wields global power, but couldn't even control the boundaries of his own household. And his downfall wasn't an overnight collapse. It was this slow, agonizing slide of compromise. Trying to be a diplomatic, tolerant husband, he let his foreign wives worship their own deities. But then he went further. He betrayed his own faith by actively filling the hills around the holy city with pagan shrines and altars for gods like Chemosh, Moloch, and Ashtoreth. It's genuinely tragic. The guy who literally had it all, unlimited gold, countless women, global peace, ultimate power, ends his life writing the book of Ecclesiastes. He looks back at his massive empire and realizes that without obedience to his foundational values, all that worldly success was just empty, just a chasing after the wind.
Which leads us to part 5, a complicated legacy. Because of that massive idolatry, the ancient texts tell us that the golden age he spent a lifetime building crumbled almost the second he was gone. Divine judgment fell hard on his bloodline. The prophet Ahijah literally tore a cloak into 12 pieces, prophesying that 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel would be ripped away from Solomon's heir. And it happened. Thanks to his son Rehoboam's arrogant taxation, the once mighty Israel permanently fractured into 2 rival kingdoms.
Even today, theologians are still heavily debating the fate of his soul. A lot of people view him as a tragic apostate, a fallen fool who threw away divine favor for worldly lust. But then, others point right back to 2 Samuel, where God actually names him Jedediah, meaning beloved of the Lord. They argued that promise meant God's steadfast love would never depart from him, keeping him ultimately secure despite his massive failures.
So as we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us with a massive question to ponder. Was King Solomon a righteous visionary? Was he a dark sorcerer commanding the unseen? Or was he simply a brilliant, incredibly flawed man who proved that even the greatest empires in history are going to fall when they lose their foundation? Think about it, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.